Our featured speaker this evening is an incredible member of the ADF team and has probably spent more time in North Carolina in the last year or 2 years than she has in any other state in the nation, including the District of Columbia, where she works and lives. She has dedicated a tremendous amount to work on issues like House Bill 2, religious liberty, and other matters here, and we're truly grateful for that. Kellie Fiedorek serves as legal counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, where she is a member of the Marriage and Family team. Since joining ADF in 2012, Kellie has courageously defended marriage and religious liberty against legal attacks across the nation. She has provided sound legal advice on religious freedom, marriage and family to state and national policymakers and advocacy organizations, including NC Family. Kellie has testified before state legislatures across the country about the importance of marriage and safeguarding our First Amendment freedoms and the First Amendment freedoms of all citizens. She has also drafted friend of the court briefs in cases challenging state marriage laws. She earned her JD from Ave Maria School of Law in 2009. Before graduating from law school, she completed the ADF Leadership Development Program to become a Blackstone Fellow in 2008. She is admitted to the bar in Florida, the District of Columbia, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Courts of Appeals for the 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 11th circuits. Any others? Okay. She's all over the place, literally. And Kellie is a great friend, but is so dedicated to the work that she does. It's not just a profession, it is a passion for her. And she does a great job, and she does it with a huge amount of grace, a tremendous intellect, and a humble leadership that sets an example for all of us. And I have learned a tremendous amount from her. I know she has worked with all of the legislators that are here, and they can testify to that as well. So Kellie, we are delighted to have you with us. Would you please help me welcome my friend Kellie Fiedorek?
Well, thanks, John, for that very kind, very generous welcome. It is so good to be back in North Carolina with y'all tonight. John is right. I feel like I should probably have maybe dual citizenship with North Carolina, and I can think of very few other states, except for maybe Texas. I should, right? Then I could vote for some of my favorite people than North Carolina. So it's so great to be back here tonight. And you know, Alliance Defending Freedom is so honored to work with John and with the North Carolina Family Policy Council. And I work with a lot of organizations across the country, but very few have the professionalism, the honesty, the integrity, and the commitment to excellence that John and the North Carolina Family Policy Council have. And not only that, not only are they defending your freedom and your children's freedom, but they are committed to winning. So please join me in just giving a round of applause to John and this amazing organization. And what a year it's been. A crazy year in North Carolina. And I was reflecting tonight on our time together and thinking about what is the meaning of perseverance? What does it mean to have defeat? What is victory? And also, why do we persevere? What is the cause of our hope? Because if you're like me, you often pause and think, man, how are we defending right now keeping boys out of girls' locker rooms and vice versa? Are we really there in 2016 America? Did we really lose just a little over a year ago? Did the Supreme Court really redefine marriage and impose on the entire country a brand new definition of what marriage means? And not only that, but they took a big hit to democracy and invalidating the vote of the people to be able to go to the ballot box and express what they desire for their state. So sometimes, you know, we know God's on his throne, but oftentimes I wonder, what does this all mean? Where are we going? Why is it worth the fight? I think it is. And as John mentioned with HB2, what a crazy couple of years. And going back even to 2015, we had a great success here in Charlotte. Because then Charlotte decided, we don't want to have this law imposed on us. We want freedom for all people here. We want to really embrace authentic diversity, true tolerance. And they rejected this harmful law in 2015. And yet, as John mentioned, it was forced on the people of Charlotte back in February. But then what happened, and John went into this, but I want to go a little bit further and share with you what I saw on the front lines, working with John day to day and his group and so many lawmakers here. What happened was truly historic, because I've seen these types of laws enacted on the city level in other states, and sometimes they'll put it to the ballot and the people will go and vote. But never before in the history of America has a General Assembly and a governor called a special session to repeal one of these laws. No one has ever realized, you know what? These laws violate the privacy of our children. They hurt our businesses. They put people in great liability, and we will not let this stand. We are going to call a special session, and we're going to fix it. And so on that day, on Wednesday, March 30th, I will never forget, it was an incredible day. We were up there at the State House that morning, and John and his team and so many allies here together worked to tell the story of why the Charlotte SOGI needed to be repealed. It needed to be repealed because it was unfair to do this to children. Everyone has not only an expectation of privacy, they have a right to privacy. And our children, our boys and girls deserve to have that, whether they're in the restroom, whether they're in the locker room, whether they're on their sports teams, whether they're on school trips. And so the special session that day had those voices shared. We had the voice of Chloe, who's a junior in high school. She came and spoke, and she testified, and she told lawmakers, you need to protect my privacy and the privacy of all children in schools. We heard from victims of sexual abuse across the state who spoke up and said, we cannot have men coming into our restrooms watching us undress, because for us, for those of us who have experienced this kind of abuse in our lives, this is a trigger moment. And so that day, the bill sailed. I wish you guys could do this more often with legislation. It sailed through. It went through the House. It went through the Senate. Senator Bishop, well, soon to be Senator Bishop. Representative Bishop did a phenomenal job defending that bill on the House floor. And so it went through. It passed both chambers, and we went to dinner that night. You were there. And we got a call from someone on Governor McCrory's team saying, because we didn't know, is the governor going to sign it, is he not? We got a call that night at dinner, and he said he was going to sign it that evening. This is truly historic to see this happen, and to watch the men and women come together to stand for privacy, to stand for dignity, to stand for truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so lucky, you are so lucky to be blessed with men and women like Representative Arp, like Representative Bishop here in North Carolina. And then we saw the pushback that came. We saw the threats that came in from the other side, because the other side in other states, frequently the threats worked for them. If they threatened, people would compromise, people would back down, but not in North Carolina. Governor McCrory and the lawmakers here said, we will not put a price tag on children's head, on children's privacy. Every single child here in this state, no matter who they are or what they're struggling with, deserve to be protected, and we will not back down. They didn't back down when the NBA threatened to leave and move to the All-Star game. They didn't back down when the NCAA threatened to leave and ultimately did leave. And just as an aside, if anyone knows anyone with the NBA or the NCAA, they still haven't answered my question, which is, if sex really doesn't matter, if there is no distinction between men and women, then when are you going to merge the leagues?
There you go.
When are you going to merge the leagues? Why do we still have the WNBA? If there aren't these fundamental distinctions between men and women and the complementarity that exists there, and also the fairness. You know, Title IX, which we're going to talk about in a minute, it was enacted over 40 years ago to ensure equality, and to ensure a balanced and fair playing field so women could have opportunities to play on sports and receive an education in an equal and fair way. So anyway, if anyone knows them, I'm still looking for the answer to that question. But then the Obama administration, you know, we already have the corporations pulling out. We have Hollywood. You know, Bruce Springsteen didn't want to play. I mean, I don't really like Bruce Springsteen anyway. But, you know, he didn't want to play here, but good riddance. Hopefully we don't have any Bruce Springsteen fans in the audience. Well, then the Obama administration decided that, it didn't really like what Governor McCrory and the General Assembly were doing. So they were like, well, you know what, we're gonna step in and we're gonna try to bully them too. So on Friday in April, they got a letter saying that you're in violation of federal law. And you need to let us know by Monday, so I work over the weekend, let us know by Monday what you plan to do about it. Well, I'm very proud to stand here and tell you what do you think they did about it. They turned around and the governor and the General Assembly filed 2 different lawsuits, filed a declaratory judgment action against the Department of Justice and the Department of Education, saying you cannot bully our state, you cannot threaten to take away our federal funding because the privacy and the safety and the dignity of our citizens matters more than anything you could ever threaten to take away with us. So they fought back, and they continue to fight back. And honestly, they've continued to fight back to this day. And as John mentioned, the elections coming up do bear grave consequences, not only for the state of North Carolina, but for this entire country. And so these lawsuits continue. There's now, how many are there? 5 lawsuits in North Carolina that have been consolidated against the Department of Justice, against the Department of Education. The DOJ turned around and sued North Carolina, so everyone's suing each other over whether or not we should be allowing boys and girls to share, beds and undress in front of each other. So it's very, very interesting time and very ominous time. We did get very good news today from the Supreme Court, from the U.S. Supreme Court. The first of the many federal lawsuits that are pending against the Department of Justice and Department of Education, the Supreme Court just granted review in one of those cases today. It's the Gloucester County School Board case out of Virginia, which we won the district court and we lost in the Fourth Circuit, which obviously has implications for North Carolina. And the court took up that case, which is good. And one of the questions they agreed to answer is whether or not Title IX, whether or not the definition of sex in Title IX includes gender identity. So it's a very important question. Obviously, the legislative history and the court precedent is completely on our side, that Congress absolutely never intended for sex to mean anything other than male and female, and that schools and other public places are perfectly free and to maintain separate facilities based on biological sex. So please keep this case, please keep all of the cases in your prayers as we move forward. In all of this, I'm reminded of a song that I listen to often. It's by Michael Smith. It's called Sovereign Over Us. And one of the lyrics in that song says, even when the enemy means for evil, you turn it for our good and for your glory. Turning evil for our good and for his glory. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we persevere, because we have hope in the King of all truth and righteousness. We don't fight for truth because we like to win, although as an attorney I like to win. I'm sure many of you all like to win, and I hope you win. But we fight for truth and we never give up because this is what Christ asked us to do. This is our responsibility as followers of him, regardless of what the results might be. To speak his word in season, out of season, and to be faithful. And that's really what I want to focus on tonight. Not just how do we mentally and also spiritually deal with defeat or setbacks or these unlawful mandates being imposed upon us by the Obama administration or also biased media. But more importantly, how do we overcome these challenges and persevere, fighting harder than ever before for what is right and good? Because the intensity of the conflict is very real. And while North Carolina won for now, and we continue to fight, these battles aren't going away. And unfortunately, they're not going to be only limited to schools. They're not going to be limited to government buildings. We're already seeing the Obama administration with Title VII trying to force employers to open up their locker rooms and gyms to members of the opposite sex. We're now seeing, the latest is in housing. Now they're now trying to force even homeless shelter or battered women's shelter. Can you imagine owning a battered women, or not owning, but running a battered women's shelter or a place for mentally challenged women, and you have a man coming and asking to live with them, to share their bedroom with them. And yet this is what the Obama administration is trying to impose on us. So there are some very grave battles, and they're all assaults to the privacy and to the dignity of each of us as human beings. So we live in very strange times, and we really have a very short window, I think, to continue to partner. And I don't say these things to dishearten you. One thing I'm reminded is Winston Churchill always said that failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And I firmly believe that each and every one of you sitting here tonight was meant to be here for a reason. And it's really funny, Amanda, that you brought up or you shared with us what your son said, because I was reflecting before my time with you tonight, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The Lord could have put us on this earth at all different times in history. He could have asked us to be fighting the Nazis in Germany. He could have asked us to fight slavery. He could have asked us to be back way in the Roman Empire when the Christians were being persecuted. There are so many different times in history where the Lord could have said, I want you, Pastor, to be here. But he didn't. He chose us for this time in history, for such a time as this, with the unique challenges that are upon us. And those we know are very, very, very strong. But he wanted you to be here. He wanted you to fight a year after the Supreme Court redefined marriage, when this crazy stuff is going on with the Obama administration. So I firmly believe that not only has the Lord placed each of you on this earth at this time in history, but in this state and in this city for a very, very specific reason. Our Lord wanted us and no one else for the challenges that are upon us. And those challenges are real, from the redefinition of marriage, the redefinition of sex, to the very meaning of freedom. Our constitutional freedoms are on the line. We're living in a world where even pastors are being told that they can't speak biblical truth from the pulpit. And if they do, they literally face jail time. We just filed a lawsuit in Massachusetts where this is taking place. We filed one in Iowa a couple weeks ago, and luckily we just actually won that this week and dismissed the suit. But this is happening. We're having to fight these battles. And it reminds me of a book. I've mentioned this before, so maybe some of you have heard this, but if you haven't, there's a book that I really love called The Tyranny of Cliches: How Liberals Cheat in the War of Ideas. It's by Jonah Goldberg. And he pointed out to me in that book, many of us are familiar with the quote, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And Edmund Burke is often given credit for saying that. But what Jonah Goldberg points out is that there's actually no record of Edmund Burke ever saying that precisely. And while I think sometimes quotes improve with age, I actually think his original words were far more powerful. This is what he said. When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that the good have indeed associated. Just a quick look around this room is evidence of that. We have Representative Arp, Representative Bishop, Representative Scott, former Representative, now Jacqueline Shaw. So many good men and women, and all of you who have partnered over the years and supported John and the North Carolina Family Policy Council. So the good have indeed associated. And it's because of all of you that in the state of North Carolina, the privacy and the dignity of our children remained protected. You did not back down. You supported those in Raleigh to stand firm. That is a huge victory. But I also want to encourage us to think more broadly. These issues of privacy and religious freedom and free speech that we fight for, they're not side issues. These are the issues. These issues ensure that the preservation of Western civilization remains intact. We're talking about the American experiment, the American dream, where we can all come together in one diverse place and share viewpoints and speak freely, and not only think inside our minds freely, but live out those beliefs in our day-to-day lives. No other country in the world, no other person under any other regime has had this privilege. Sure, they've all had the freedom to believe, but what makes America so unique is that we have the freedom to peacefully live out those beliefs, whether at home, whether in our church. That's uniquely American. And so when you partner with the North Carolina Family Policy Council, you are working with them to preserve these core principles. And our rights and our freedoms, they don't come from the government. They don't come from the Obama administration. Our rights come and are inherent within us because we are created in the image and likeness of God. We have inherent dignity, and that is where our rights come from. And the government's responsibility, and they're way, way off base right now, is to protect those rights, to safeguard those fundamental first freedoms. So you may not be on a battlefield in Gettysburg. You may not be storming the beach in Normandy, but you are courageously defending fundamental constitutional freedoms, the right to privacy, the right to free speech, and the right to freely exercise our religion, and not only preserving that for yourself, but for your children and for your grandchildren. So I stand here this evening to, one, thank you, but to challenge you to prepare for the new battles that lie ahead, and to ask you to pledge to continue to associate. Our opponents insist that they know what's best for us. They want us to toe the line of their ideology, and they have zero tolerance for anyone who dare to disagree. And if they can't do it through the legislature, they do it by executive fiat, which we're continuing to see this pattern and practice coming from the Obama administration. So what do we do? I have 3 points to leave with you tonight, and I would just ask that you remember these leading up to November 8th, and then also after November 8th, because what happens on November 8th is in God's hands, but it's up to us to make sure that the results are what would honor him. So the first thing is rejoice and persevere. Again, I say rejoice. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. Be joyful always, says Paul to the Thessalonians. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. To the Corinthians, he says, in all our troubles, my joy knows no bounds. To the Ephesians, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything. To the Philippians, rejoice in the Lord always. And to the Romans, we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. How easy it is to recite these verses when things are going well, and how difficult it is for these truths to resonate in our hearts when things are going poorly. But St. Paul didn't say rejoice if trials come. He said to rejoice when trials come. And Galatians 6:9 tells us, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Why else do I say rejoice and do not weary? Because I know that darkness never permanently prevails. And whether we want to review the historical accounts of the Bible or our own country, we know that a brighter day is ahead. We saw brighter days happen this year, far brighter than we could have ever imagined a year ago. We know from history that neither the Supreme Court nor the current administration have always had the last word on fundamental human rights. And I say rejoice and persevere because God's grace and his mercy are neither dampened nor weakened by the state of our culture. In Lamentations, as the prophet Jeremiah was groaning out for the utterly sad state of affairs in which the nation of Israel found itself, Jeremiah said, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And lastly, I say rejoice because we have the ability to change things, and we are changing things. In the past 6 months, and the fight for privacy here in North Carolina is evidence of that. And this leads me to my second point, or challenge for us tonight. We might be demonized, we might be disliked, but everything will depend on whether we refuse to be demoralized. Courage displayed in the cause of truth and of right is powerful, so be courageous. Each of us has a role to play in the battles that lie before us for such a time as this, and we cannot be satisfied with mediocrity. We must rebuild the culture that God has given us. And this starts within our own hearts, our own families, our friends, and our communities. And we cannot sit idly by while others are hurting beside us and simply think, well, that's too bad, or I'm going to pray for you. And not to say that prayer isn't important, it's vital, but we have to take action. There's a reason why when we come to weddings, it's not just for the food or for the dancing, it's to be a witness. It's to support them and to live out godly virtues in our lives and the lives of our families. We must take an interest in our neighbors and call upon our elected officials, our school board members, our pastors, our city council members, and the church to be a beacon of hope and truth and conviction in the battles that lie ahead of us. And if we want society to truly revere and value marriage and the complementarity between men and women and those unique distinctions and differences between men and women, we must boldly and winsomely live that out in our lives and courageously speak about it to all those we meet. And this leads me to my last point of where we must go in the fight to safeguard this great American dream and this American experiment. The first victory we need to secure right now before anything else is to ensure we have men and women in elected office, protecting our children's privacy, protecting our fundamental freedoms. Votes indeed have consequences, as John talked about earlier. So nothing perhaps is more important right now than what happens on November 8th. The entire country, and I've been in so many states, I can buttress everything that John said. They are all looking to North Carolina. I know of at least 5 or 6 states that want to follow in the courageous footsteps y'all have laid out for them, but they are watching to see what happens. This is a big test, so we have to be a light for the country, to be a trailblazer for important issues like the privacy of our children. The second most important thing we can do is to stay engaged, both before the election and after. And this is why we must lock arms together. The good must continue to associate, because we are stronger when we are together. We cannot allow ourselves to be picked off one by the other side. So this might begin at the school board level, it might begin at the city council level, but get engaged. Consider talking to teachers, to principals. Talk to them about these important issues, because regardless of what happens at the U.S. Supreme Court, the battles continue to be at the local level. So if you haven't reached out to someone you know on a school board, reach out to them, take them to coffee, ask them about the importance of privacy and safety and dignity of our children. It also might mean hosting a speaker in your community, at your church, to talk about what are the issues we're facing. What is your church facing? What is your community facing on issues of free speech and free exercise? I know John and the North Carolina Family Policy Council have great resources on this, so use them, rely on them. They're here to serve you. And Alliance Defending Freedom is so honored to partner with them. And if you need help on any legal issue, we're here to represent you, to defend you on a pro bono basis. So, in conclusion, I wanted to share with you a story. Many of you have heard of one of our clients, Baronelle Stutzman. She's the florist in Washington State who's been sued by the Attorney General there in the ACLU for declining to participate in a same-sex wedding ceremony. She's known the gentleman that's now suing her for 10 years. She's created all sorts of arrangements for him and his partner. She considers him a dear friend. But because she couldn't participate in one event, she has the state attorney general, the highest attorney in the state, coming after her to try to silence her and compel her to violate her conscience. So we get to argue her case before the Washington State Supreme Court on November 15th, and I would covet all of your prayers for her and for that case and its implications for religious liberty and free speech around the country. But I was traveling with her earlier this week. We were in Pennsylvania, and she was sharing her story, and someone came up to her and said, how can we help you? We're behind you, or we want to pray for you. And she said, I appreciate the prayers. I appreciate that you're standing behind me, but I need you to stand beside me and to lock arms with me. And so my question for all of you tonight is, will you be the next Esther, however the Lord is calling you here in North Carolina? Will you stand firm in the faith and run the race? Will you stand beside people like Baronelle, like the North Carolina Family Policy Council? Will you allow the Lord to use you as he's calling you to partner with everyone in this great state for such a time as this? Will you fight to preserve your children and your grandchildren's ability to live and to work consistent with their convictions? If so, we will not be picked off one by one in a contemptible struggle, as Edmund Burke talked about. We will rise victorious together because we have God, we have truth, and we have each other on our side. So thank you for letting me be here, and God bless each and every one of you.